Welcome, Dr. Epic here. And what we're going to discuss in this section is the Leviathan, island kingdoms, a giant ring in the ocean, and the sexual life of savages. We are going to talk about Bronislaw Malinowski. We're going to talk about the political structures of the Trobriand Islanders, the Kula Ring itself, and Malinowski's critique of the Boasian method. We're going to follow that outline right up above my little yellow box, and you should put that in your notes to serve as a table of contents for what is about to follow. Now, when we left off with the Trobriand Islanders, we basically posed that the Trobriand Islanders had overcome two problems with living in islands scattered across 800,000 square kilometers of the Pacific. And those two problems were, one, how to maintain regular contact so that one island could help another during times of crisis and deprivation, and two, how to prevent endemic warfare between these islands over time. The Trobriand Islanders solved both of these problems, and their solution to these problems was the Kula Ring. But before we actually get into the Kula Ring itself, we have to talk about political philosophy. We have to talk about a giant monster called the Leviathan, and that is the Leviathan. The Leviathan is a book. The Leviathan is written by a guy called Thomas Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes was a 17th century English political philosopher who wrote a series of arguments, and well, he wrote the Leviathan, and in the Leviathan he builds this series of arguments about why governments exist. And the full title of his book is The Leviathan, the Matter, Form, and Power of a Commonwealth, Ecclesiastical and Civil, published 1651. And Thomas Hobbes is going to feature quite prominently in other parts of this class, so pay close attention to what we're talking about in terms of Thomas Hobbes. And Thomas Hobbes, I mean, it's a very interesting argument. It's a very complex argument that he makes in the Leviathan. And the way I'm going to present it right here is of course, a gross simplification. But basically, Thomas Hobbes makes 2 points in the Leviathan. Point one, that the basic nature of people is to be selfish and wicked. People are, at their heart, wicked, evil, selfish creatures who care nothing for their fellow man. All right? To be good requires effort and requires a little bit of fear. This is Thomas Hobbes did not have a very high opinion of humanity. So Thomas Hobbes says, left to ourselves, humans exist in a state of nature, and the state of nature is incredibly savage, where life is nasty, brutish, and short. And in this savage state of nature, that is the sort of natural state of humankind, is that it is a state of war of all against all, that you have groups of people and you have individuals, and if we see something, we just take it. And if we see someone that has something we want, we hurt them until they give it to us, or we kill them and take it. That is what Thomas Hobbes says is the natural state of nature. Nasty, brutish, full of wickedness and warfare, where people just commit unspeakable crimes against each other with no thought whatsoever. The second part of Thomas Hobbes' argument is his solution to sort of the natural savage state of humanity. And his solution is a monster called the Leviathan. And that's a picture of the Leviathan on the cover right there. Thomas Hobbes says that humanity has an innate problem with violence. And the solution to this innate problem is to build a government. And the government is the Leviathan. To build a government that is so powerful and so terrifying and so scary that fear of the Leviathan forces people to be good. All right? That if I see something I want, I don't just take it because I know that the government, the Leviathan, will hunt me down and punish me for theft. If I see someone who has something that I want, I don't just kill them and take it because I know that the Leviathan will hunt me down and execute me for murder. This is the second part of Thomas Hobbes' argument, that the solution to the innate problem of humanity is the government, a strong, powerful, terrifying government with a king at its head that exercises absolute power. And the more power, the more rights and freedoms that we surrender to the government, the greater the government can keep us safe. We give up freedom to the government in return for the government promising to keep us safe. That is the theory of Thomas Hobbes, that humanity is an inherent savage state of nature and has a problem with violence, and two, that the solution to this innate violence of humanity is a strong, powerful central government. Now, this might sound like, just a bunch of, philosophical navel gazing and people sitting around in their drawing room going, oh, well, I think this. Well, that is an excellent point, sir. I think this. But that's not the world Thomas Hobbes lived in. Thomas Hobbes lived in a very savage time that saw, 1 out of every 3 people in Germany killed. All right, 30 Years' War, the English Civil War. Thomas Hobbes lived through some savage periods of history. And he wrote the Leviathan as a way to pull humanity back from the brink of anarchy and violence and warfare. And the Leviathan is a foundational text of modern political philosophy. One of the main reasons that our governments have a monopoly of force, or, in the case of the United States, a negotiated and sort of balkanized monopoly of force, partial monopoly, an imperfect monopoly of force. One of the reasons that we surrender so many freedoms to the government is the return that the government is going to keep us safe, with police, with rangers, with hospitals, with the army, the military. The governments run militaries because of the arguments made in Leviathan. Now, certainly Thomas Hobbes' arguments seem true if we move slightly to the north and to the east of the Melanesian Islands. And in this, I'm talking about Polynesia. And if you look to that map on the left, you can quite clearly see there's Melanesia right there, and the huge island chain to the north and to the east. That's Polynesia. Polynesia includes everywhere from New Zealand to Easter Island to Hawaii to Fiji to Yap. And within Polynesia itself, Polynesia has a very, very violent history to it. That from Hawaii to New Zealand to Fiji to the Empire of Yap, Polynesia seemed trapped in this endless cycle of violence, where you would have the rise of charismatic war chiefs or charismatic kings. They would build these Polynesian kingdoms, conquer their neighbors, and then, that would persist for 1 or 2 generations before that the royal family collapsed, and these big sprawling oceanic kingdoms and empires would collapse in anarchy, death, and violence. And indeed, throughout Polynesia, you have these cycles of warfare between islands, and these almost endless cycles of endemic warfare that took place across these Polynesian islands. The Polynesia has an exceptionally violent history. But Melanesia does not. Melanesia has no kings. They have no presidents. They don't have government of really any kind. Yet they help each other in times of trouble, and they don't make war on each other. And in fact, when they've been attacked in the past by other Polynesians or by invaders from the north, they've been able to defend themselves because they don't have a government, they don't have a king. What they have is Kula. They have the Kula Ring. Now, the Kula Ring is very complicated to explain, so bear with me as we move through this. Now, Kula is just a word that means exchange. It means trade. And the Kula Ring itself, this is the most basic definition for the Kula Ring. The Kula Ring is a ritualized exchange system between kin groups on different islands. So you have Island A and you have Island B, and you have different big families on each island. That's what I mean when I say kin group. So a kin group, a big family on Island A, will enter into a relationship with a big family on Island B, and they will exchange ritual objects. These are called Kula. And in fact, they exchange very specific kinds of objects. The Trobriand Islanders exchange Kula objects, which are these big ornaments that get traded from island to island to island. And there's only 2 types of these Kula objects. You have Mwali and Suvlava. The Kula objects consist of only two types of ornaments. Mwali, which are over there, they are basically armlets that are made of white shells, and Suvlava, which are right up above my head, Suvlava are necklaces made of red shells, red beads. You can only exchange a Suvlava for a Mwali or a Mwali for a Suvlava. You can't exchange them for anything else, okay? I can't give you like 10 pigs for a Mwali. I can't give you 3 canoes for a Suvlava. I can only give you a Mwali for a Suvlava and a Suvlava for a Mwali. Okay, so Kula Ring is ritualized exchange of Kula objects, and the Kula objects are either Mwali or Suvlava. All right, where it gets more complicated. Because there's only several thousand of these objects, and every single one of them is different. Every individual Mwali and Suvlava is distinct. It has its own history, it has its own look, and none of them look identical. Each Kula object possesses its own history of who owned it and what they did with it. Each Kula object item possesses a certain status based on how old it is, based on who its previous owners were. The older a Kula object, the more prestige it has. And if it has this long mythic historic history, then it's going to be like really an incredible object. The older the Kula object is, the more prestige it has and the more status it conveys on its owner at any given moment. And all of these different objects look the same, whether they're Mwali or Suvlava. You can see on the left here are 2 different Mwali. There's one that the guy's actually wearing around his shoulder, and that is a Mwali that has all kind of stuff on it. It's encrusted with just stuff and extra gewgaws and more shells and a big thick rope. In fact, there's so much stuff that's on that Mwali, on that armband, that he can't actually wear it as an armband. He's got to wear it as like kind of this sash. And you compare that to the Mwali, which is just immediately to the right of him. That's a very, very simple Mwali. That is a low status Mwali. It was only made 10 or 15 years ago. It doesn't have this storied history to it. But that Mwali on the far left, that is an old Mwali. Because you see, there's dozens and dozens of each type of object, and each family has at least one Kula object. And you could actually make your own Kula objects, but it's going to look like that. It's not going to be adorned. Nobody's going to know its history or the legends or the stories that are attached to it. Because every time a Kula object is exchanged, every new owner is expected to modify the Kula object in some way. If I inherit a Mwali and I trade it for a Suvlava, I have a new Suvlava, I am expected during my lifetime to add something to the Suvlava. Each owner will add or modify the Kula object in some way, adding their own distinctiveness to it. You add something to the Kula object that sort of represents you. Each owner adds a new piece of history to the Kula item and gives his own status and history to the Kula object. So if that guy on the left took off that Mwali and sort of laid it out on the ground, every time it had been modified is a different exchange that took place with this Mwali and its entire history. And it could be several hundred years old. Every single object, every single modification of the Mwali tells of a different owner and tells of a different exchange made through time. Here are some Suvlava, these necklaces of red shells. And you can see every single one of them is different. These items are actually in a museum in Australia. And in fact, we're actually going to talk about it because the Trobriand Islanders want these things back because the entire point of a Kula object is for it to move within the Kula Ring. And that way it sort of grows and acquires a history to it. And if these things are locked in museums, they don't acquire any more history. They've been frozen in time, and that's not the point of them. They're not objects of art. They're not meant to be just kind of placed on a wall and admired in a static environment. They're meant to be used. They're meant to acquire new histories and new legends to them. But you can quite easily see all of these objects are different. And every owner who has owned these Suvlava has modified it in some way. So how do you actually exchange these Kula objects? You exchange them during a trading expedition. So twice a year, the men on one island will go on a trading expedition to another island. And they'll bring yams and pork. And if they wish, they'll bring maybe one or two of their Kula items. And this is what Malinowski was interested in originally. He was interested in, exchange and commerce without money or markets. So, I mean, look at these little boats. I mean, look at that little boat on the left. They're going to climb in that boat. They're going to fill it with pigs and yams, and they're going to get about half a dozen dudes in there, and then they're going to cross 1,000 miles of open ocean in it. And they do this twice a year. This is enormous. It takes enormous bravery to do this. And yeah, every now and again, somebody will leave on a Kula expedition and never come back. They'll never just vanish into the ocean. So they cross thousands of miles of open ocean in these tiny little boats. It's very risky to go from island A to island B, to go from island to island to island. And Malinowski climbed into one of these boats as part of the Kula exchange. Now, all of this is known about in advance. Like a trading expedition doesn't show up on an island and the people are surprised. They've all arranged this beforehand. We know that on a certain day, on a certain month, you guys are going to show up and we're going to have a big party. So all of this is known about in advance. So as soon as the trading expedition arrives at its island, the visitors are greeted. Everybody shows up. They have this nice dance. They want to show off the ferocity and bravery of the men, the wealth of their village, and the beauty of their women. That's why they show off everything as this new expedition arrives. The canoe, as you can see on the left, is actually picked up out of the water. It's hauled up onto the beach so it doesn't wash away with high tide. And they unpack everything from their canoe, all of their sweet potatoes, yams, and their pork. And again, both sides are trying to show off how wealthy and prosperous they are. The visitors are trying to show off the wealth and prosperity and the quality of their food and pigs and the bravery in crossing the ocean. The home team is trying to show off how wealthy their own village is and the beauty of the women, the wealth of the village, the ferocity of the men. All the stuff I talked about before. And then they have a big feast, okay? They have a huge feast, all right? Here is this huge feast in the early 20th century. They like slaughter dozens of pigs. They cook all of these yams. They have all of this fruit. They bring in all this seafood. They make way, way more food that could possibly be eaten. In fact, most of the food, like 70 to 80% of the food that they make for this feast ends up getting thrown away. Again, the point of the feast is not so much to make sure that everybody is fed. It's to show off the wealth of the village. In fact, one of the odder things about these feasts is that the people will often starve themselves several days as they get ready for the feast because they don't want to slaughter all of their pigs because they want to really impress the visitors when they show up. So they have these massive feasts. Everyone eats far more than they should. Everyone drinks far more than they should. And indeed, they can't even possibly eat all the food. Most of it is just hauled off into the forest and thrown away once all of this is done. Now, these are images from modern Kula exchanges. So, I'm sure you're getting tired of black and white images. This is modern Kula. Very good looking fellows. And this is what these things look like today. And they still do these things to some extent, even though they use power boats and power launches to cross the ocean. They don't use small little open air canoes. And at some point in time during the feast, the visitors will get up, they'll go to the chief will greet them, and here they are greeting the chief. And they will look at the pigs and the yams that the visitors brought, and they'll compare the pigs and the yams that, the hosts have, and they'll look at them, and they'll kind of exchange, and they'll talk about them a great deal. And then they'll finally agree that we're going to give you this many yams and this many pigs in return for almost the exact number of yams and the exact number of pigs. And this utterly and completely baffled Malinowski, who comes from an economics background, because the objects they were being traded were exactly the same. There didn't appear to be any profit that was made during this exchange. And they took these exchanges very seriously. And they would, examine the pigs and they'd look at the yams. And they're like, well, you have excellent, 200 pounds of yams. These are wonderful 15 pigs. Absolutely great. I tell you what, we'll trade you for 15 pigs and another 200 pounds of yams. And they'll shake and they'll leave the yams and pigs they brought, and they'll take the yams and pigs and load them on their canoe for the return journey. The objects being traded during these trading expeditions are exactly the same. There is no profit to be made. And this was Malinowski's befuddlement. This was Malinowski's question. Why are these people risking their lives crossing hundreds of miles in open oceans in tiny boats just to trade for stuff that they already have? The pigs are pretty much the same. The yams are pretty much the same. Why would they do this? But Malinowski, again, when he asked them, they would just say, oh, we're just trading pigs and yams. But Malinowski wasn't just asking them like a Boasian would. Malinowski was in the boat. Malinowski went on the journey. Malinowski is at the feast. Malinowski is both participating and observing. And he observed that a far more serious part of the feast wasn't the trade, it wasn't the exchange, it wasn't the dancing, it wasn't even the eating of the food. It was at one point in time, the visiting headman, the visiting chief, would kind of just lean against the hosting chief, and they would have a very serious conversation. And what they were talking about was Kula. The Kula objects. The leading men from one family, from one kin group on one island, talking to the leading man of another kin group on a second island, would start talking about whether they want to enter into a Kula relationship. So the leading men at some point in time in the feast, they meet each other and they come to an arrangement about Kula objects. Maybe I would like to exchange my family's mwali for your suvlava. And if your suvlava is like way nicer than my mwali, I can sweeten the deal. I can throw in a couple canoes and maybe some pigs. But that's just sweetening the deal. The main point of the exchange is exchanging a suvlava for a mwali or a mwali for a suvlava. See, I told you that the Kula Ring gets complicated. I told you it gets complicated. Still more complicated. Because the point of this is not to trade yams for pigs or pigs for yam. The point of the Kula objects isn't even to really trade these sort of legendary mythic objects one for the other. The point is the relationship between the two families. If the two men decide to exchange Kula objects, they enter into something that's called, I'm going to try and pronounce this, a Korea Ta'au, a Kula relationship that the Trobriand Islanders themselves call a man marriage. It is a type of permanent, lifelong Kula agreement between two men of two different families on two different islands. Such relationships tend to be lifelong arrangements. A Kula arrangement, a Korea Ta'au, is a long-term, lifelong alliance between two kin groups on two different islands. And it is a sacred agreement. It is as permanent and as serious as a marriage. And the Trobriand Islanders themselves have a saying, once in a Kula, always in a Kula. Kula relationships often last an entire lifetime, and they can often be intergenerational. My great-grandfather might have entered into a Kula relationship that was reaffirmed by my grandfather, that my father reaffirmed, and now it is my turn to reaffirm this Kula relationship, this permanent alliance that I have with another family on another island. And I am going to make sure that my son and my grandson keep this Kula relationship alive. Now, you're not limited to a single relationship. Men and kin groups can exchange multiple Kula relationships that can strengthen this alliance through continued Kula exchange over time. And in fact, some of these kind of intergenerational Kula relationships, they often end up like getting their kids intermarried and stuff. Like, my grandson, I go on a trading alliance, I go on a trading expedition that is to reaffirm the Kula relationship between my family and another family on another island. And I bring my grandson along, and my grandson, makes goo-goo eyes at my Kula man marriage partner's granddaughter, and we noticed that they're making goo-goo eyes at each other, and we're like, that would be really good for our families. All right, that would be like if your granddaughter hooked up with my grandson and we got those two married, that would be like really good for both our families. This is how these Kula relationships work. But again, the Kula objects have no objective value. They're just shells and necklaces. But it's what they represent. It's their sort of symbolic importance within the subjective reality of the Trobriand Islanders that make them so important. In and of themselves, they're just shells. But within the culture, they represent a serious commitment between two different groups of islanders. Men in a Karea Ta'au will assist each other during times of famine, during times of natural disaster. If I have some pest gets on my island and I end up having to slaughter all of my pigs to wipe out this horrible disease, I have to restart my pig population. Who am I going to go to? My alliance partner on another island. I'll go to him and say, we got some pest, some rind pest or something, killed all of my pigs, but all my pigs are dead, so I think my island is free. I need some pigs to start, new pig farming. He's going to give them to my family because he knows in 5 or 10 years, some horrible typhoon might come and tear their island apart, destroy all their food. And they might send a word to me saying, look, our island is totally messed up by this typhoon. Can we live with you for like a few months until we get back on our feet? And I'm going to say, yeah. It is a permanent alliance between two different families on two different islands. And this permanent alliance, they'll help each other out in times of natural disaster. It's a type of social insurance. And more often, they won't raid each other's island. If I hear that some people are going to attack, my buddy's island, I'm going to go talk them out of it because I don't want them attacking my man marriage partner on another island. It's just going to make me look bad. It's just going to sort of damage whatever relationship that I have with those guys. And so the result is that there's almost no warfare among the Trobriand Islanders because they're all entangled in these Kula relationships in this giant Kula ring. Again, they won't raid each other's islands. They'll help each other out in times of famine or natural disaster. They often arrange marriages between their children, and they'll come to their aid if their partners are raided. If a big Polynesian war party is entering the Trobriand Islanders, word will spread, and I'll receive message from one of my Kula partners on another island that, wow, there's these foreigners coming in and we got to repel them. I'm going to grab a few of my angry boys and we're going to go help out my partner. The Kula Ring acts as a sort of decentralized government that fulfills all of these roles. So you have two different men on two different islands will form a close-knit and long-lasting alliance with each other. Such alliances involve gifts, they involve the exchange of marriage partners, indebtedness, changes in relative status, because I want to help out the status of my buddy on another island, and he is going to help me out raise my status on my own island, because our mutual statuses will help each other out over time. And what you want to do is use all of your Kula relationships to sort of make sure that your kin group, your family, becomes the largest and most powerful family on your island. And they'll use their alliances in attempts to become island chiefs. And then the island chiefs will then cooperate to enhance the status of their Kula partners. And they, again, advertise their Kula relationships. Here's the lodge of one of these sort of island chiefs. And he literally, on a beam in front of his house, he's hung out all of these Kula objects he has. My Lord, there's got to be like 40 or 50 of them up there. So he is engaged in this sort of Karea Ta'au, a man marriage with 50 other men on 50 other islands. That is a powerful chief. He is a guy who will help out his friends, and his friends will help him. And the Kula Ring keeps these islands in contact. The Kula Ring makes sure that one island can help another island, and the Kula Ring sets up a permanent system of mutual defense and Pacific cooperation. Just, I meant like non-violent, but they're in the Pacific Ocean, and that's kind of a dad joke. Anyway, there is one final wrinkle, just as you thought the Kula Ring couldn't get any more complicated, because the objects could only be traded in a certain direction. The red necklaces, the Suvlava, can only be exchanged in a clockwise direction, while the white armbands, the Moali, can only be exchanged in a counterclockwise fashion. So hence, every man in the Kula Ring has not just one, but two Kula partners. You have one that is clockwise from you and one that is counterclockwise from you. And when you finally draw this on a map, like Malinowski did, you end up with a ring, a giant ring in the ocean, the Kula Ring. Kula items are not money, okay? They are prestige items. They cannot be sold. They can only be traded one for another. Objectively, they're worthless. Subjectively, they represent long-term intergenerational alliances between different kin groups on different islands. But when you do exchange them, you actually can, like I said before, you can sweeten the deal. If you've got a low status Moali and you want to exchange it for a high status Suvlava, you can you can give the low status object, and you can give like other stuff with it, like boats or like yams or pigs or just money. So you can help convert material wealth into status, but the reverse is almost never true. Now, I do want to point out that the Trobriand Islanders are a warrior peoples. All right, they are very ferocious, and the Polynesians rarely tangled with them because they knew these guys were really, really tough to tangle with. They are a warrior people, but and today they maintain that warrior tradition. They just don't attack their own people. They like fight with people outside of the Kula Ring. And what they do today is that they've channeled this warrior spirit into sports, because the Trobriand Islanders are like really, really crazy about cricket. They were part of the British Empire. The British introduced cricket to the Trobriand Islands, and the Trobriand Islanders they're just one of this handful of people in the world that just decided that cricket is just like the best thing ever, and you can like hurt one another with cricket bats, and they dress up like they're getting ready for a Kula exchange or a Kula feast to play cricket. And now today, when they have these Kula trading expeditions, they'll not only have a dance and a greeting, but now they'll play cricket with one another, because they're really into cricket. They're really into cricket. I don't understand cricket. It's like kind of like a weird baseball. That's the best I can get, and even that's probably not a good description. So this was Malinowski's insight when he's sitting in this tent on the Trobriand Island for 4 years, writing Argonauts of the Western Pacific. Malinowski's insight was to understand the Kula Ring is gift exchange. It's an exchange system where profit is not the goal. It's an exchange system that reinforces long-standing political and economic alliances with a strong moral equivalent. Kula partners do not raid one another's islands. Kula partners do not go to war with one another. Kula partners can be counted on during famine or storm or deprivation. Kula partners can be counted on to trade fairly. Kula partners allow their children to intermarry. And this alliance is solidified, is concretized in the Kula object itself. Kula items signify trust. I trust you. You trust me. And this trust allows both of our families to prosper. And in this way, the Kula Ring and the Kula items within the ring serve a function. The Kula relationships serve the political and economic needs of the individuals and of the families of that individuals. This is an important point, and we'll return to it in just a tick. But before I do that, I want to say, do our culture, American culture, Western culture, does American culture possess anything that is roughly equivalent to a Kula object? Write that question in your notes. Cogitate on this question, because I'm going to ask you to answer this question and explain your reasoning. Something that is objectively not very valuable, but nevertheless it symbolizes something incredibly precious, or it symbolizes an achievement that is incredibly noteworthy, but is not that valuable in and of itself. Think about it. Now, this realization, this sort of realization that Malinowski had, that these cultural structures serve a function, this brings him into direct conflict with the way the Boasians were studying culture. The Trobriand Islanders like the Kula Ring because it is a cultural structure that functions to serve their needs. Malinowski showed how this cultural practice serves a function. It does something. It provides something to the people. And he can explain the cultural institution without any recourse to Nietzsche, without any recourse to Freud or these sexual hang-ups or any sort of psychological or philosophical rationale. He doesn't need any Western-based philosophical or psychological interpretation to explain the Kula Ring. And in fact, Malinowski began to be really, really critical of the Boasians and how the Boasians were studying culture. To Malinowski's mind, they are not describing how these cultural institutions function, how these cultural institutions serve the needs of the individuals of that culture. Malinowski argued that these institutional structures are going to change. They exist to serve needs, and as the needs of the group changes, so that the structures of the culture are going to change as well. So if you're going to study culture, you're not going to just describe stuff and then just sort of give big, vague interpretations of what you describe, but instead you need to describe what the structure, how the structure functions for the people, what need it serves. And if the need changes, then the cultural structure is going to change. So according to Malinowski's argument, Malinowski could show not just how a culture functions, but how it can change over time and how some traditions can be abandoned completely. And that's why I have the little schematic of a clockwork. This is kind of my visualization of how Malinowski wants to study culture, like it's a very, very complicated machine. What do the different parts do? What needs do they serve? And if those needs change, the different parts of the machine will fall off because the people don't need them anymore. And this leads to this really big debate. It's one of the three big debates we're going to look at. We've already looked at one of them, which is Mead-Freeman, and now we're going to look at Malinowski-Boas. This is Malinowski's critique of the Boasian approach, and Malinowski versus Boas. And he does this in true economic fashion with a 500-page book called The Sexual Life of Savages, which is probably like the greatest book title in all of anthropology. It like sounds so lascivious and so naughty. Like, hey, what are you reading? What is Dr. Epic having you read? He's having us read a book called The Sexual Life of Savages. And then somebody's like, ooh, what's that about? It's about kinship systems and how kinship systems, how the structures of kinship function to serve the needs of a society. That's what it's about. Now, this is one of the arguments he makes in Sexual Life of Savages. And we'll explore some of these kinship structures later. But this is basically how it works, that you have a Trobriand village, which is the diagram right up above me, and then there's a photograph there on the left. Now, each of these villages is comprised of several large kin groups, these big families that I was talking about. And here's one of the tricky bits about Trobriand Islander society. Trobriand society is matrilineal. So you are born into the family of your mother. Like you would essentially take the last name of your mother, but it is patrilocal. So you're born into the village of your father. All the land belongs to the women, but all of the stuff that's on the land, the houses and the boats and the things that he makes, that belongs to the husband. So you have this weird sort of division of ownership of material within the family. The family does not share property, but rather the nuclear family, such as it exists in Trobriand Islander society, has a strict division of goods. Now, this is how it is. Bear with me, this gets a little complicated. So, you have each family. You have a mother with her siblings, with her brothers and sisters, and her children belong to one kin group, belong to one clan, but the father, that's dad right up above, dad actually belongs to another kin group, and he might actually be on another island. Hence, one of the odder things about the Trobriand Islanders is that they have no word for father. The Trobriand Islanders have no actual word for father. The equivalent is called Tama, which basically means like mother, basically mom's husband. All right? That's their word for father, mom's husband of my mother. And in fact, fathers are often referred to as Tomakawa. Oh, there's my Tomakawa. And Tomakawa simply means outsider, because their biological father does not actually raise his own children. The person who raises the children in a family is not their biological father, but is instead their mother's brother, their kada. This is the person who basically raises them. So if I'm a man in Trobriand Islander society, I will not generally raise my own biological children. I will raise the children of my sister. All right? And so forth. And my own children will be raised by my wife's brother. It's the kada who is responsible for children. He makes sure they do not disgrace the family. He makes sure they know how to hunt. He makes sure they know how to farm. He makes sure they know how to fish. Property is handed down through the female line. Land is handed down through the female line. Hence the kada, their mother's brother, will take the children in the field and will get them to work. It is the kada that is the stern disciplinarian figure within the family, because children are not disciplined by their biological father, their tama, their mother's husband, but rather they are disciplined in the field by their mother's brother, their kada. In a Trobriand family, you would never hear, wait till dad gets home. You would hear, wait till your kada hears about this, your mother's brother. Wait till your uncle hears about this. In fact, the father, there's dad right there, the biological father has no familial authority whatsoever. All right? He will never discipline his own children. The result is that the mother and her children only sees her partner and their biological parent when he gets home from the sea or the field, and it's all enjoyable. So it's the end of the day, the sun is going down, the kada delivers the children from where they've been growing like sweet potatoes all day, and he's like, yeah, I had to spank little Timmy, he broke a tool, and little Timmy's all crying. And then their kada goes, I'll see you later, and then he leaves to go to his own wife's house that he built for her. And then it's the mother and her kids, and then walking up the street is their tama, mom's husband. And he gets home and everyone cheers. It's fun time. It's happy hour, because it's always happy when tama comes home. He's never going to discipline them. He brings them gifts. He showers affection on them. He's very sorry little Timmy got spanked in the field. But, that's what kada's got to do. That's what he's there for. There's almost no contention between husband and wife, because husband and wife own nothing in common. Almost all property is her family's anyway, and money concerns are generally handled between a wife and her brothers, not between husband and wife. And I want to point this out, that in our society, in American society, with its enormous divorce rate, something like the chief cause of divorce is money problems. In Trobriand Islander society, there are never money arguments between husband and wife, because they own nothing together. Now, there's a lot of arguments between siblings. Like a wife and her brother, they will have huge fights about money, but not within the family, not within the biological family. So your bio dad comes home, your tama comes home, he plays with his kids, He has a little game. They eat dinner. They laugh. He puts the kids in the other room. He makes kissy faces with his wife. They go to their room. That's their family life. Divorce is almost unknown in Trobriand Islander society because economic concerns and family life are completely separated. And the stern Kata who spanked little Timmy in the field, by the time he gets to his own wife's house, he's a completely different person. I mean, look how happy that guy is. All right? Kids don't look too happy, but he's having a good time. Economic concerns and family life are completely separated. There's almost no tension inside families. In fact, it kind of sounds nice. And this is the insight that Malinowski had when he studied Trobriand family life. He had two important insights. One, that the kinship functions to meet the need of the Trobriand Islanders. If you're living with a few hundred people on a small island in the middle of the Pacific, you cannot have nasty family squabbles. All right? Everybody's got to work together. And you don't need to explain family tension. There's no need to go and cite Nietzsche and talk about Apollonian and Dionysian families or societies. There's no need to sort of build this collective personality to describe Trobriand family life. And they use it because they like it. They like their kinship structure because it makes life on the island better and more bearable. Their kinship structure serves a need. It meets a demand. It is a cultural structure that functions. And two, there is no paternal authority figure, and hence no sexual rivalry between fathers and sons. In fact, there's very little tension inside families at all. Families are for relaxation, fun, sex between married partners. And in short, in the Trobriand Island society, there is no concept of the Oedipus complex, which was one of the main sort of things that Freud argued causes family tension. I don't know if you know about the Oedipus complex. I'm going to talk about it real quick. Sigmund Freud argued that one of the reasons that families are so dysfunctional is because the sons compete with the father for the attention of the mother. And this has often been sort of jokingly boiled down to the fact that Freud argued that secretly all men want to kill their fathers and have sex with their mothers. Like the legend of Oedipus from Greek mythology. But, and Freud argues this is a major reason that there's a lot of tension inside families. There is no Oedipus complex on the Trobriand Islands. There's none, okay? Children do not get into huge screaming arguments with their dads. They get into huge screaming arguments with their katas, with their mother's brother, but that's a different story. Between their biological father, relations are great. When dad gets home, it's time to have fun. He's never going to discipline you. He's never going to, compete with you for mother's attention. It's time for fun and games. And if the Oedipus complex doesn't apply to the Trobriand Islands, that means that the Oedipus complex is not universal of human culture. Ergo, the Oedipus complex might not be applicable to any place in the world, to any other people. In fact, it might not even be applicable to anybody outside of Vienna, where Sigmund Freud was studying all these sexually repressed Germans. All right? In short, Malinowski argued that none of the psychological models developed for Western culture applied to the Trobriand Islanders. And if they don't apply to the Trobriand Islanders, they might not apply anywhere. And he really said you can't apply Freudian analysis. You can't apply Nietzschean philosophy to non-Western peoples, just willy-nilly, because it might not have any function within their society. And he explains this as, quote unquote, this is Malinowski's quote from Sexual Life of Savages. I'm going to read it right here. Quote unquote, the failure, even the explicit aversion of psychoanalysts, that's what he called the Boasians, psychoanalysts. The failure, even the explicit aversion of psychoanalysts to seriously consider social organization. This is a harsh critique. Malinowski basically says that all of this research that all of those Boasians did, and there's old Franz Boas, there's up on the upper left, and there's Ruth Benedict, and there's Margaret Mead, and there's Malinowski. Malinowski says you guys didn't explain a research culture at all. None of the work you did explains how these cultures function. None of the work you did explains how cultures change. None of the work you did can even begin to answer the question, why are the tribes and nations of the world different? And how has such differences arisen? In short, Malinowski said, you guys essentially wasted your lives. That's a harsh critique. Now, there's an excellent documentary on Malinowski that was published by the same people that did that really great documentary we saw about Margaret Mead. It's called Tales from the Jungle, Malinowski and the Trobriand Islands. And it explicitly deals with his diary and the fact that he wrote really nasty things in his diary that was sealed for 50 years. It's not going to be required, but I strongly urge you to go seek it out. It's really, really good. And the actor they got to play Malinowski looks exactly like him. And the thing is that in this debate between Malinowski and the Boasians, they were at complete loggerheads. But you see, what Malinowski did is Malinowski was not really trying to convert the old Boasians. What he was trying to do is convert the students of the Boasians. And Malinowski's approach is going to dominate the next 40 years of cultural anthropology, because Malinowski kind of won the debate against Franz Boas. And Malinowski's insight and Malinowski's sort of method of studying culture is going to usher in this kind of golden age of cultural anthropology, the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. And we're going to talk about that next time. And I will see you there.